Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it on a Sunday morning, with sunlight cutting through the blinds and the smell of coffee in the air. I need emotional distance. Her tone was clinical, like she was reading from a manual about how to dismantle a marriage without getting her hands dirty. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I just looked at her and said, "Distance granted. Permanently." That was it. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just silence. Heavy, surgical, final. She blinked, almost surprised. Like she expected me to argue, to plead, to fight for what was already dead. But I'd spent too many nights talking to walls that didn't answer back. The kitchen felt colder than it should have. Her iPhone buzzed on the counter, face down. She didn't reach for it. She just stood there, waiting for me to break the tension. I didn't. I finished my coffee, left the cup in the sink, and walked out. The drive felt unreal. The same streets, the same house-lined neighborhoods. Everything looked normal, but something in me had shut off completely. I stopped at Dunkin', grabbed a black coffee, and sat in the parking lot staring at my reflection in the windshield. I didn't look angry. I looked done. By the time I got back, she'd rearranged the living room, like she thought moving furniture would make it a new life. Her laptop was open, a glass of wine half-finished next to it, and a Target candle burned on the counter. She looked up when I came in, her expression unreadable. She said, "You're quiet." I told her, "You asked for distance. I'm just giving you what you wanted." That night, I slept in the guest room. No drama, no tears, just two people breathing in the same house, but living in separate worlds. Her footsteps in the hallway sounded like they belonged to a stranger. In the morning, I found her sitting at the table scrolling through her phone. I poured my coffee, grabbed my keys, and told her I'd be out for a while. She didn't ask where. She just nodded, like she couldn't decide if this was freedom or punishment. I drove for hours that day, stopped at a lake, turned off my phone, and let the world go quiet. That's when it hit me. The distance she wanted wasn't about space. It was about control. And the moment I stopped giving her my reaction, she started losing hers. That was the first day she realized silence could be louder than love. The next few days felt like watching my own life from outside a window. We spoke less, moved around each other like ghosts, pretending not to notice how cold the air had become. She cooked dinner once, set 2 plates out like muscle memory, then ate alone when I didn't come downstairs. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was just learning what it felt like to stop chasing someone who'd already let go. I started working longer hours, leaving early, coming home late. She didn't ask where I'd been. She didn't care to know. Or maybe she did, but pride wouldn't let her show it. That was the thing about her. She always needed control, even when it was slipping away. One evening, I came home and found her sitting in the living room, wine glass in hand, her laptop open to a half-written email. She looked up and said she'd been thinking about taking a trip to clear her head. I said nothing, just nodded, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself water. She waited for me to react, to question, to beg her not to go. When I didn't, she frowned, almost like she was disappointed. Later that night, I saw her suitcase half-packed on the bed, clothes folded neatly, perfume bottle on top, a book she never finished. It looked rehearsed, like she'd planned the scene in her head, the sad wife who needed time to think. I sat down in the chair across from the bed, calm and steady. She turned, startled. I told her that if she needed distance, she should take all she wanted. But once she walked out, there wouldn't be a welcome-back moment waiting for her. The distance would be permanent. She didn't answer, just stared at me, speechless, as if she didn't recognize the man who'd finally stopped bending. The next morning, she was gone. No note, no text, just the faint smell of her perfume in the hallway and her toothbrush missing from the counter. I made coffee, sat at the table, and realized something strange. The silence she'd asked for actually suited me. No tension, no pretending, just space. By evening, she texted once. "You really don't care, do you?" I didn't reply. That was the moment I knew I'd finally taken control of the one thing she couldn't manage, my attention. She wanted emotional distance. I gave her exactly that. Now she'd have to live in it. A week passed before she reached out again. By then, I had already adjusted to the quiet. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt clean. Every sound, every pause, every breath belonged to me again. I'd wake up early, make coffee in the same kitchen where we used to argue, and feel a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. Her first message came late at night. "I thought you'd check on me." I stared at it for a while, then turned off my phone. I didn't need to check on someone who'd chosen distance like it was a luxury. The next morning, I drove out to the lake, the same one we used to visit when things still felt new. I sat on the tailgate of my Ford F-150, coffee in hand, watching the fog roll over the water. It hit me then. I wasn't angry anymore, just detached, like I'd finally stepped outside the circle she'd been spinning me in for years. That night, she called. I didn't answer. She texted again, long messages this time. They started calm, explaining, rationalizing, then shifted into confusion. "Why aren't you saying anything? You always cared before." This isn't you. But it was me. It was the version she never thought would surface, the one that didn't react. By day 3, the tone changed again. "Can we talk?" turned into "we need to fix this." Then, hours later, "You're being cruel." Cruel? No. Silence isn't cruelty. It's the echo of everything left unsaid after years of being ignored. A few days later, a friend of hers called me, the one who always pretended to be neutral but loved drama. She said my wife wasn't doing well, that she was confused. I told her confusion is what happens when the game ends and no one's left to play. I didn't hang up angry, just done. The following week, her sister texted me. She's back in town, says she wants to talk face to face. I didn't reply right away. I went about my day, groceries at Walmart, coffee at Dunkin', a quiet evening in front of the TV. Normal things. Peaceful things. That night, I finally sent one message back. "You wanted distance. You got it. Use it to think." And then I turned off the phone again. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. 2 weeks later, I came home to find her car parked in the driveway. The sight didn't sting the way I thought it would. It just felt misplaced, like a scene that no longer belonged in my story. The porch light caught the side of her face through the window, pale, tense, rehearsed. I took a breath before walking in. She was sitting at the kitchen table, the same spot where she'd once said she needed emotional distance. A cup of untouched coffee sat in front of her, the steam long gone. She looked up as I entered, waiting for something. I didn't give it to her. I hung my keys, took off my jacket, and poured myself a drink. She started talking fast, words tripping over each other. She said she'd been thinking, that she'd made mistakes, that maybe she pushed too hard. She said the silence scared her. I didn't interrupt. I let her fill the air with everything she'd ignored before. When she paused to catch her breath, I told her calmly that she got what she wanted. She said she needed space. I gave it to her. She said she wanted clarity. I gave her silence, the only thing that tells the truth. She said it wasn't supposed to go this far. I didn't respond. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw fear behind her eyes. The fear of someone realizing too late that the person they thought would always wait has already moved on. She said she missed me. I believed her. But missing someone doesn't rebuild trust. It just reminds you of what you destroyed. I finished my drink and told her that distance isn't something you measure in miles. It's measured in effort. She had stopped trying long before I stopped talking. That silence wasn't punishment. It was consequence. She sat there for a while, quiet, staring at the floor. I could see her processing it. Not just my words, but the weight of her own. Finally, she whispered that she didn't think I'd actually let go. I told her I didn't either. But sometimes, you wake up one day and realize love doesn't die all at once. It fades with every ignored word, every deflected glance, every night spent feeling alone next to someone who swore they cared. When she left that night, I didn't watch her go. Because this time, distance wasn't granted. It was earned. After that night, she didn't show up again for a while. The silence returned, heavier but cleaner. It felt like the house had finally exhaled after holding its breath too long. I filled the empty space with things that used to make me happy, late-night runs, music I hadn't played in years, quiet dinners with no one asking what was wrong. A week later, I stopped by Dunkin' before work. The same girl behind the counter smiled and asked if I wanted the usual. That simple routine felt more real than any of the conversations my wife and I had in the last year. Consistency. Effort. 2 things she'd long stopped giving. But I won't lie. Some nights, the quiet got heavy. There were moments when I'd catch myself listening for her keys in the door or the sound of her walking down the hall. It wasn't love anymore. It was memory. And memories can be cruel when they start sounding like ghosts. Then came the message that shifted everything. It wasn't from her. It was from a mutual friend, Mark. He said he thought I should know. He sent a screenshot. Her and someone else. A man I didn't know. The messages weren't explicit, but the tone was familiar. Flirtation dressed as friendship. I read it once, closed my phone, and sat back in silence. It didn't even hurt. That was the part that surprised me. There was no betrayal left to feel because she'd already taken everything worth losing. I'd been mourning the relationship long before it officially died. The next day, she called. Not to apologize, to justify. She said she didn't plan it, that it just happened, that she'd been lonely. The irony almost made me laugh. She'd begged for emotional distance, and now she was blaming the space she created. I told her I wasn't angry, because I wasn't. Anger means you still care. I'd crossed that line weeks ago. She started crying, said she didn't recognize herself anymore. I told her that was the point, that sometimes the only way to see what you've become is to watch someone walk away from it. She said she wanted to fix it. I told her you can't rebuild a bridge after you've set fire to both ends. And that was the last thing I said before hanging up. That night, I slept better than I had in months. It didn't take long for the story to spread. Small town, familiar faces. People notice when someone like her starts breaking apart in public. I didn't say anything to anyone. I didn't need to. Her unraveling was its own confession. From what I heard, she started showing up late to work. Colleagues whispered that she looked exhausted, distracted, sometimes on the verge of tears. The man she'd chosen, the one from the messages, had apparently vanished. Just stopped answering one day. The same silence she once weaponized was now turned on her. I didn't feel satisfaction, just symmetry. A few nights later, I ran into one of her friends at a bar. She said my wife had been asking about me, whether I was seeing someone, whether I hated her. I told her no, to both. Hate takes energy, and I'd stopped giving her mine. When I got home, I found a letter slipped under my door. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It wasn't long, just a few lines about regret, about wishing things were different. She ended it with, "You used to be my calm." I folded the paper neatly and placed it in a drawer. Not out of nostalgia, out of closure. Because you can't rewrite a story when the ending already fits. Over the next few weeks, I kept moving forward. I started working out again, rebuilt old friendships, spent weekends driving aimlessly with no destination. Freedom felt different when it wasn't an act of rebellion, but a return to self. Then one Sunday morning, I saw her again. She was standing outside a Walmart, groceries in hand, staring blankly at the parking lot. Her face had changed, not older, but quieter, humbled. When she noticed me, she hesitated. For a second, I thought she might come over. But she didn't. She just stood there, clutching the bags like they were keeping her grounded. I nodded once. No smile. No bitterness. Just acknowledgement. She nodded back, her eyes wet but steady. It wasn't apology anymore. It was realization. She finally understood that emotional distance isn't just a line you draw. It's a wall you build. And sometimes, when the other person stops knocking, you realize you've locked yourself inside. She wanted distance. Now she had it. Completely. I didn't see her again for a long time after that. Life settled into something simple. Work, gym, the same quiet mornings with black coffee and no one asking where I was going. I thought maybe that was it, the end. Until one night, she showed up at my door. It was late. The kind of late that only belongs to bad decisions and unfinished business. When I opened the door, she was standing there in a hoodie, eyes red, hands shaking. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. The confident, untouchable woman I once knew was gone. What stood in front of me looked like someone trying to find shelter in a house she'd burned down herself. She said she just wanted to talk. I stepped aside but didn't invite her in. She took it as permission anyway. I watched her walk into the living room like she was walking through memories. Her gaze stopped on small things. The framed photo I hadn't taken down, the coffee mug she used to claim, the couch where we stopped talking long before we separated. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, that she finally understood what she'd lost, that the man she'd been with turned out to be everything she once accused me of being, distant, selfish, cold. The irony didn't even sting. It just confirmed what I already knew. People don't change. They just run until their patterns catch up. I didn't respond. I just stood there, calm, unreadable. She started crying then, the quiet kind, where tears fall but no sound comes out. She said she missed the way I made her feel safe. I told her safety isn't something you miss after you destroy it. She begged for a second chance, said she'd do anything to rebuild what we had. I looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "What we had doesn't exist anymore." She froze, like the words hit harder than she expected. I told her distance was never the punishment, it was the consequence. And sometimes, once you get what you asked for, it's too late to send it back. She didn't argue. She just nodded, wiped her face, and walked out without another word. I stood there for a while, staring at the empty space she left behind. The silence felt heavier than ever, but not painful, just final. For the first time, I realized she wasn't my loss anymore. She was my lesson. After she left that night, I thought it would be the end. But endings have a way of echoing. The next few weeks, she kept trying. Small texts, random calls, messages that started as just checking in and ended with, "I can't stop thinking about you." I didn't respond to any of them. I'd already learned that attention is a currency, and I wasn't financing her confusion anymore. One evening, I was at the gym when I saw her again. She was standing by the front desk, talking to someone, pretending to look relaxed. But when our eyes met, her face gave her away. She froze, tried to smile, but her hands trembled slightly. I just nodded, walked past her, and started my workout. The silence between us had become its own kind of language, sharp, precise, inescapable. Later that night, she texted me again. "You're really not going to say anything?" I didn't. The next message came 5 minutes later. "I can't believe how cold you've become." But it wasn't coldness. It was balance. For years, she'd been the one pulling strings, deciding when to connect and when to disappear. Now, she was learning what it felt like to be on the other side of that silence. The one that doesn't answer, doesn't chase, doesn't need. A few days later, her sister called me. Said she was worried. Said my wife, or ex-wife, depending on what you call someone who left in every way but legally, had stopped going out, stopped eating, stopped pretending. I listened, said I hoped she'd find peace, and ended the call. There was nothing left for me to fix. That night, I sat by the window with a coffee, watching the lights flicker across the street. For the first time, I thought about how distance can be addictive. Once you learn the calm of solitude, chaos looks unappealing no matter how familiar it once was. The next morning, I drove to the lake again. The water was still, the air cool. I remembered how she used to say the silence out there was uncomfortable, that it made her think too much. I smiled at that, because now, that same silence was the only thing she had left. She asked for emotional distance. And now, she was talking to walls that didn't reply. Time has a strange way of softening even the sharpest edges. Months passed, and her name stopped showing up anywhere. No calls, no texts, no mentions through mutual friends. The world finally went quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was clean, deliberate. The kind you choose, not the kind that's forced on you. I'd moved into a new place by then. Smaller, simpler, overlooking a quiet street where no one knew our story. Every morning I'd make coffee, check the news on my phone, and go for a run before work. My life had rhythm again, not excitement, just balance. The kind that doesn't need to be explained to anyone. Then one afternoon, I saw her name pop up on my phone. It had been almost 5 months. For a moment, I considered ignoring it like all the others, but something in me wanted to see what version of her would show up this time. The message was short. "I just wanted to thank you for walking away when I didn't know I needed you to." I read it twice, then put the phone down. There was no sadness, no pride, just understanding. Because sometimes, distance does what love can't. It teaches clarity. A week later, I saw her by chance downtown. She was walking out of a Target with a shopping bag, earbuds in, hair tied back. She looked normal. No drama, no exhaustion. Just a person living her life. When she noticed me, she froze for a second, then smiled, small, genuine, like someone finally at peace with her own consequences. I nodded back. No conversation. No closure. Just acknowledgement between two people who'd burned the same bridge and finally stopped standing on the ashes. That night, I sat by the window with the city lights flickering below. It hit me that I didn't hate her. I didn't even resent her anymore. Because in some strange, twisted way, she'd given me something priceless, the version of myself that no longer needed her approval to exist. She thought she wanted emotional distance. What she really wanted was control. But when I gave her what she asked for, she realized too late that real distance isn't measured in miles. It's measured in silence. And silence, once it settles, never leaves. It was nearly a year later when our paths crossed again. Early spring, quiet afternoon, the kind of day that feels like a pause between chapters. I was sitting outside a small cafe, coffee in hand, watching people pass by when I heard someone say my name. Her voice, softer, slower, like she was testing the sound before committing to it. I looked up. She was standing there, hesitant but calm. No makeup, no forced smile. Just real. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't tense anymore. It was just honest. She asked if she could sit, and I nodded. We talked. Not about the past exactly, but around it. She said she'd been through a lot, that she'd finally started therapy, that she understood now how much she'd pushed people away trying to feel in control. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She just wanted me to know she saw it all clearly now. The damage, the pride, the distance. I listened. Not with bitterness, not with pity, just with the calm of someone who no longer lives inside the storm. She said she still thinks about the day she told me she needed emotional distance, that it was the moment everything started breaking. I told her it wasn't the words that broke us. It was everything that came before them. The neglect, the detachment, the games. Words are just the echo. She looked down, nodded slowly, and said she hoped I found peace. I told her I already had. Not in someone else, not in revenge, but in silence, the kind that isn't empty, but full of self-respect. She smiled then, faint but real, and said she was glad. Then she stood, hesitated like she wanted to say something else, but didn't. She just looked at me one last time and whispered, "Thank you." After she left, I stayed there a while, watching the sunlight fade over the street. There was no sadness, no nostalgia, just clarity, because endings don't always need a bang. Sometimes they arrive like this, a quiet acceptance that love ended where self-worth began. I finished my coffee, paid the bill, and walked out into the soft evening air. The world felt lighter. She once said she needed emotional distance. I gave it to her. Now she speaks softly to walls that don't reply. And I've learned that peace isn't found in someone's arms. It's found in walking away without looking back. Been through it. When they crossed a line, and you made sure they felt it.